Hi, everybody. Well, thanks for joining me for this little seminar in administrative law, even though none of us is back in New Orleans yet, I don't think. And my thoughts are all with you, those of you who've traveled a long way. We were 23 hours going out to Atlanta, Georgia. And as you can see, we're in a little place in Cedartown. And so let me tell you a little bit about how I think this distance learning is going to work on YouTube. I'm making a lecture that's going to be roughly 40 to 50 minutes long, and I'm going to chop it up into blocks of about 10 minutes each. So there'll be 5 blocks, and each of those is going to be on YouTube. What you can do is take a look at each of the installments on YouTube whenever it's convenient for you, but I hope sooner rather than later. And make sure that you've done the reading that I've assigned in the Percival book. Let me get started. Let me give you my first little spiel about administrative law. Administrative law is really important. It should be one of the most important courses in law school. Probably should be required. There are a few schools that do it. Administrative law is essentially about how agencies work. In most administrative law courses in law school, how agencies work at the federal level. And that is extremely important because that's how all of government works, basically, is through agencies today. It wasn't that way in the 18th century, and it wasn't that way particularly in the 19th century, but it is that way today. And so if you have any hope as a lawyer of understanding how government works on a day-to-day level, you have to understand how agencies work. The other part of administrative law talks about what the separation of powers should be among the different branches of government. And this is one of the things that's pretty important. Administrative law is about agencies, and agencies, as I have said, are basically within the executive branch of government. But in a very practical way, in a very pragmatic understanding of agencies, they seem to be outside of government in the sense that they're almost a fourth branch of government. Now, I didn't bring my normal teaching tools today, but I borrowed some from one of my sons, and this is what I want to show you. These are the 3 branches of government. All right, you've got this is the president here. You've got the executive branch, and my son, who was in 6th grade a few years ago, came home one day and said, there's the president, and the president only enforces the laws, and here's the legislature, okay, the Congress, and they write the laws, and here's the court systems, the judiciary, the 3rd branch of government, and they interpret the laws, say what the laws say. And he said, so you see, the president here only enforces law. And I said to him in kind of a way, I'm a law professor type, and so I said, you know what? Actually, the executive branch can do all of those things. But don't tell your teacher that because she'll never believe you. And it's true because agencies, what I'm going to call the 4th branch of government over here, are mainly within the executive branch, and in some ways are in charge of doing all of these things. That is enforcing law, making law, and even interpreting law and applying law in some ways. Now, the criticism against the 4th branch of government, that is agencies, is that unlike these other branches, they're not in the Constitution. And unlike these other branches, they are, to use a word from a senator in Illinois from the 1960s, agencies are headless. And that is one of the problems that we will see running through administrative law in our environmental law class. The lack or apparent lack of accountability. Who is in charge of these agencies, and how can they be influenced? And how can the public have some sort of limitation on what it is they do? These are all of the things that we're going to be talking about in administrative law. Administrative law is important to you budding environmental lawyers because almost everything that law does to regulate the environment comes from federal agencies. Like a lot of things, including corporations, or including securities transactions, including employment, safety, and these kinds of things. The environment is one of these areas that's completely occupied by federal regulation. And so we're going to learn about a lot of different agencies. If you're going to be concerned about air and water, for instance, that we're going to be looking at later in the course, the Environmental Protection Agency is the agency that's going to be in charge of that. If you're interested in wetlands, it's mainly the Department of Defense and the Army Corps of Engineers, which is within the Department of Defense, which manages at the federal level wetlands protection. Forestry, forest issues, timber issues, all of that is under the Department of Agriculture, believe it or not. Endangered species that are in the continental United States or living on land, mainly controlled by the Department of Interior. Marine fisheries are mainly controlled by the Department of Commerce under NOAA. And so there are all of these different agencies in many different sides, and we have to learn how they work and what rules limit them and control them. Just a quick note on some nomenclature. So when you go to the cocktail parties and you're talking about agencies in Washington, D.C. someday, you'll be able to use the right words. I'm using agency to explain or to describe essentially offices that are within the executive branch of government. Although you do sometimes see agencies that are under under Congress, or in some cases even under the judiciary. I'm not going to talk about those today. Agency is a blanket word that we use to describe things like the EPA, the Army Corps of Engineers, FEMA. These are all agencies. When we talk about offices that are actually at the level of cabinet positions, we use the word department. So the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Agriculture, these are all what you might think of as agencies, but because they have cabinet level status, we call them departments. The head of departments is generally a secretary of some kind. So you've got the Secretary of Interior, the Secretary of Defense, and so agencies, as I've said, are offices within the executive branch that help implement policy. To put it in the easiest way that I probably can, agencies fill in gaps. So you might imagine that Congress writes lots of laws, and these laws are pretty huge, right? I mean, some of them are hundreds of pages long. But Congress can't be, even with that amount of space, as explicit as it possibly wants. And so if Congress says in the Clean Air Act, as it does, that it wants the air to be clean enough that it protects human health and safety with an adequate margin of safety, let me say it again, that it protects human health and the environment with an adequate margin of safety. That's a term from the Clean Air Act. But Congress doesn't say what that means. It doesn't say how much sulfur dioxide should be allowed in the air. It doesn't say how much lead should be allowed in the air. It doesn't say how much soot should be allowed in the air. All it says is this is a law, and this law is designed to make sure, to require that the air standards should protect human health and safety with an adequate, it should protect human health and the environment with an adequate margin of safety. And it leaves it to the agency, in this case to the EPA, to decide what that is. And so the EPA is left with the job of deciding how much sulfur dioxide should be in the air, how it should be regulated, and so on. They fill in gaps in that way. Now, we have a long history of agencies. Agencies create regulation. Regulation is the word for law that is created by agencies. And so again, to give you a little bit of vocabulary building, we have statutes like the Clean Air Act, which are passed by Congress. And then the statutes have lots of holes in them. They have lots of things, lots of details that need to be written. And usually Congress, in its statutes, say there's a lot of other stuff that has to be done here. We're not going to write it today because we're not scientists and economists and all of this, and we don't have enough time. So what we're going to do is we're going to say that an agency within the executive branch of government will be in charge of writing regulations that enact the details of what we want.